The Vrexian weapons facility was built into the side of a mountain, its reinforced walls and defensive emplacements visible even in the darkness. As the 47th approached through the rocky terrain, Curran moved with the command element, their recording device capturing everything. While their hearts pounded with fear, they no longer tried to suppress. They had stopped, pretending to be a detached observer somewhere between the memorial service and the moment they strapped on the lightweight armor that Park had insisted they wear. The assault began with a coordinated strike on the facility's power systems. Teams of human soldiers moving with lethal precision through the outer defenses. Curran watched from a concealed position as Private Han led her squad through a breach in the perimeter wall, her movements confident despite the scar that still marked her side. The Vrexians responded with overwhelming force, pouring out of the facility in numbers that exceeded intelligence estimates by at least 50%. Energy weapons lit up the night, and Curran saw soldiers fall in the first seconds of the engagement. The humans did not retreat. They pushed forward, fighting through the kill zones with a determination that bordered on madness. Lieutenant Kang went down with a wound to his shoulder, but continued directing his squad from the ground until medics dragged him to cover Corporal Beak, who had been cleared for limited duty despite her prosthetic leg still being calibrated, provided covering fire from an elevated position until her ammunition ran dry. Then began using weapons scavenged from fallen enemies. The battle moved inside the facility, and Curran found themselves swept along with the command element as they pressed toward the central weapon storage. The corridors were narrow and filled with smoke, the sounds of combat echoing off metal walls in a cacophony that made communication nearly impossible. Han appeared beside Curran as they rounded a corner, her face streaked with grime and her eyes blazing with something that might have been fury or might have been joy. "Stay close," she shouted over the noise. "We are almost there." They reached the storage chamber to find it defended by a final contingent of Vrexian soldiers, their chitinous bodies forming a living wall between the humans and their objective. The fighting was brutal and close, hand-to-hand in places where weapons fire risked detonating the stored ordnance. Curran saw a Vrexian soldier emerge from concealment behind Han, its weapon raised and aimed at her unprotected back. They did not think. They did not calculate risks or weigh tactical options. They simply screamed a warning, their voice cutting through the chaos with enough force that Han spun and fired before the Vrexian could pull its trigger. The Vrexian fell, and Han looked at Curran with an expression of shocked gratitude before turning back to the fight. The final push came when Captain Park led a charge into the heart of the Vrexian defensive position. Curran watched him move through enemy fire as if it were rain, his weapon spitting death while his voice called out encouragement to his soldiers. They watched Sergeant, his arm still not fully healed, tackle a Vrexian twice his size and wrestle it to the ground. They watched humans bleed and struggle and refused to stop. And they understood finally what made this species so terrifying to the rest of the galaxy. It was not their strength or their technology or their tactical brilliance. It was their refusal to accept defeat, their absolute commitment to each other, and their willingness to die for something greater than themselves. The Vrexians broke first. The surviving insurgents fled deeper into the facility, and Park ordered demolition teams to begin rigging the weapons for destruction. Victory should have felt triumphant, but instead the aftermath was quiet and heavy with exhaustion. And then Curran saw Sergeant. He was lying against a wall near the entrance to the storage chamber, his chest a ruin of burned flesh and shattered armor. Two young soldiers knelt beside him, their hands pressed uselessly against wounds that no field medicine could repair. Curran moved toward him without conscious decision, dropping to their knees beside the man who had worked to free them from rubble with one functional arm, who had refused to calculate whether a Thesari observer was worth saving. "Observer," O said, his voice weak but somehow still warm. "You made it. Because of you," Corinne replied. And their voice broke on the words, "You saved my life. And I never thanked you properly." O smiled, and there was no fear in his expression. Only a kind of peaceful acceptance that Corinne found both beautiful and devastating. "Take care of them," he said. "Take care of my people." "I will," Corinne promised. And they meant it with every fiber of their being. O reached up with his remaining hand and touched Corinne's face gently. A gesture of connection that transcended species and culture, and everything Corinne had ever been taught about professional detachment. "Tell my mother I love her," he whispered. "Tell her I was not alone." He spoke a name, just one word in a language Corinne did not recognize. And then his eyes closed, and his hand fell away. Corinne held him as he died, this human who had become their friend. And they wept without shame or restraint. The transport back to base was silent, except for the hum of engines and the occasional sound of muffled grief. Corinne sat among the survivors, their uniforms stained with blood that belonged to beings they would never see again. No one spoke, but hands reached out in the darkness to touch shoulders and squeeze fingers and offer whatever comfort could be found in shared sorrow. Park sat beside Corinne for most of the journey, his own face drawn with exhaustion and loss. "Your report," he said finally. "What will you tell the council?" Corinne had been thinking about that question since the moment O stopped breathing. They had been sent to observe human combat operations, to document methodology and analyze psychological patterns, to reduce the mystery of human military effectiveness to data points and statistical analyses. Instead, they had found something that defied quantification. "I will tell them the truth," Corinne said, "that humans are not dangerous because of their weapons or their tactics, but because they make you want to be worthy of fighting beside them." Park nodded slowly. "And then what will you do?" Corinne looked around the transport at the faces of soldiers who had become their family. They thought about Beak's determination and Han's courage. And O's final smile, they thought about the person they had been when they arrived on Rithara 4. The cold analytical observer who had dismissed these beings as emotional and irrational and ultimately inferior. That person seemed like a stranger now. "I am going to resign from the observation course," Corinne said. And the words felt like freedom. "I am going to request assignment as a permanent liaison to the 47th Battalion." "We would be honored to have you," Park replied. And his hand reached out to grip Corinne's shoulder in the human gesture of solidarity and support. The formal ceremony was brief, conducted in the same clearing where 17 soldiers had been mourned just days before. Park stood before the assembled battalion and announced that observer Corinne Seo had been granted permanent liaison status, making them the first Asari to ever serve directly with a human military unit. The soldiers applauded. And then they surged forward to embrace Corinne, surrounding them with arms and bodies, and the overwhelming warmth of acceptance. Han was there, her eyes bright with tears and laughter. Beak was there, standing on her prosthetic leg with stubborn determination, and somehow, in a way Corinne could not explain, O was there too. His presence felt in every hand that reached out and every voice that welcomed them home. Later, standing alone in the quiet darkness, Corinne transmitted their final report to the Galactic Council. It was unlike anything the observation corps had ever received. Part analysis, part testimony, and part love letter to a species that had changed everything Corinne thought they knew about the universe. The report concluded with words Corinne had never imagined they would write. "I was sent to observe humans in combat, to document their methods and understand their effectiveness. But instead, I discovered something far more significant. These beings possess a capacity for love and sacrifice that defies logical analysis. And in their presence, I found something I did not know I was missing. They woke something inside me that I had been taught to suppress. The understanding that connection and vulnerability are not weaknesses but strengths, and that a life lived in careful detachment is no life at all. I am no longer the same being who arrived on Rethar 4 seeking data, and I do not wish to be. I have found my people among the stars, and I will never leave them. Karin saved the report and closed their device, then turned to walk back toward the base, where lights were beginning to flicker on in the mess hall. Somewhere inside, their family was gathering for the evening meal. Ready to welcome them home, they had come to observe humanity. Instead, humanity had observed something sleeping inside them, and for that gift, Karin would be grateful for the rest of their life. The field hospital was quieter than Karin had expected. They had imagined screaming and chaos, the sounds of beings in agony filling the air with their suffering. Instead, there was a strange peace to the place. Wounded soldiers speaking in low voices and medical staff moving with calm efficiency between beds. 17 humans had died in the assault on Varanthal. The number seemed impossibly small given the scale of the operation and the odds they had faced. But Karin had learned that humans did not measure loss in statistics. Each of those 17 names represented a universe of memories and relationships and unrealized potential. And the weight of that understanding pressed against Karin's chest in a way they had never experienced before. Corporal Beak had lost her right leg below the knee. She lay in a bed near the window, her remaining limb bandaged and elevated, watching the dusty landscape outside with an expression that seemed more contemplative than pained. "How are you feeling?" Karin asked. The words feeling clumsy and inadequate. Beak turned and offered a small smile. "Alive," she said. "Thanks to you, by the way. Since you helped us move that rubble even though you were terrified. I did very little. You did enough." Beak replied firmly. "You stayed with us, and you helped, and you did not give up. So that makes you one of us now, whether you like it or not." Sergeant O was in the bed beside her, his arm immobilized in a regeneration cast that would restore function within a few weeks. He had been awake when Karin arrived, but had fallen asleep during their conversation with Beak. His face peaceful despite the medication that must have been coursing through his system. "He will be fine," Beak said, following Karin's gaze. "Tajin has survived worse than this, and he will be back in the field before the doctors want him to be." "Why did he risk himself?" Karin asked. His injury was severe enough that continued exertion could have caused permanent damage. Yet he insisted on freeing me first. Beak was quiet for a moment, her eyes drifting back to the window. "Because that is who he is," she said finally. "Because leaving someone behind, even someone he barely knows, would have hurt him worse than any physical wound." The memorial service was held at sunset. The sky painted in shades of orange and purple that seemed almost deliberately beautiful. The humans gathered in a clearing near the base. 300 soldiers standing in formation around 17 empty booths arranged in a careful line. Karin watched from the edge of the gathering. Uncertain whether their presence was appropriate, Captain Park noticed them and gestured for them to join the formation, positioning them among the soldiers as if they belonged there, one by one. Soldiers stepped forward to speak about the dead. They told stories that made no mention of combat effectiveness or tactical value. Instead, they spoke of the woman who always shared her dessert rations and the man who could make anyone laugh even in the darkest moments. They spoke of the soldier who had been learning to play guitar and the one who had been planning to propose to his partner. When he returned home, a young private broke down completely while speaking about his best friend, his words dissolving into sobs that shook his entire body. The soldier beside him put an arm around his shoulders, and then another soldier joined them, and then another, until the weeping private was surrounded by his comrades, held upright by their combined strength. Karin felt something wet on their own face and realized with shock that they were crying. The Sari did not cry. Their physiology did not support the production of emotional tears. Yet somehow their eyes were leaking fluid and their chest was heaving with something that felt like grief. After the service, Park found Curran sitting alone in the mess hall, staring at a cup of nutrient solution they had not touched. "First memorial service?" he asked, taking a seat across from them. "The Thesari do not hold such ceremonies." Curran replied, "We acknowledge death as a biological inevitability and move forward without prolonged, ritualistic processing." That sounds lonely. Curran considered the statement a week ago. They would have dismissed it as anthropocentric projection. But now they were not so certain. "Perhaps it is," they admitted. "I believe I am beginning to understand why you form these connections, despite the pain they inevitably bring. Because the alternative is to move through existence without ever truly knowing another being. And that seems like a different kind of death." Park nodded slowly. "That is more insight than most observers manage," he said. "Most of them watch us and see chaos and irrationality, inefficiency and emotional weakness. I saw that too, at first. And now I see something else." Cohen said carefully, "I see beings who have found a way to make meaning in a universe that offers none, who face death not with detachment but with love, and who somehow become stronger through the very connections that make them vulnerable." The conversation was interrupted by Lieutenant Kang, who arrived with a tablet displaying tactical information and an expression that suggested bad news. "We have a problem," he said. "Intelligence has located a Vrexian weapons cache approximately 30 kilometers east of here, and it contains enough ordnance to level every remaining civilian settlement on the continent." "How long until they can deploy it?" Park asked, his demeanor shifting instantly to combat readiness. "Estimates suggest 2 to 3 days. Maybe less if they accelerate their timeline in response to our success at Varantal." Park studied the display for several seconds before looking at Kang with an expression Curran had come to recognize. "Volunteers only," he said quietly. "We lost 17 people yesterday, and I will not order anyone into another high-risk operation this soon, sir. The entire battalion has already volunteered." Kang replied, "I asked before I came to find you." Curran watched Park's face cycle through emotions too, quickly to catalog pride and grief, and love and determination all mixed together in a combination that defied analytical description. "Then we move tonight," Park said. "Full tactical briefing in 1 hour." As Kang departed, Curran made a decision that surprised them. "I want to accompany the mission," they said. Park turned to look at them, his expression unreadable. "That would be inadvisable," he said. "The risk profile is significantly higher than Varantal." "I understand. You could be killed. I understand that as well. Then why?" Curran struggled to articulate feelings they were only beginning to comprehend. "Because you are my people now," they said finally. "Because I cannot watch you go into danger and wait safely behind. Not anymore. And because whatever you face out there, I want to face it with you." Park studied them for a long moment, and then his expression softened into something that looked almost like respect. "Suit up with the command element," he said. "An observer. Try to stay alive, because the paperwork for losing a Galactic Council representative would be a nightmare." As Curran left to prepare, they passed the briefing room where soldiers were already gathering through the open door. They could see humans exchanging small items and pieces of paper, could hear them reciting names and contact information to each other. They knew what this ritual meant now. These soldiers were memorizing who to notify if the worst happened, were entrusting each other with the sacred responsibility of informing loved ones that their universe had been forever diminished. Curran found themselves praying to gods they had never believed in, whispering words in the old Thesari tongue that their rationalist training had taught them to dismiss as primitive superstition they prayed not for. data or for their report or for their own. Survival. They prayed for these strange and beautiful beings who had somehow become their family. The city of Varanthal had been under siege for 11 days when the orders came. Karin stood in the command center with Captain Park and his senior officers, watching the holographic display that showed the Rexian positions surrounding the city like a tightening noose. 12,000 civilians remained trapped inside, mostly Retherans, but also a significant number of off-world traders and workers who had been unable to evacuate before the insurgents closed the perimeter. Reinforcements are 18 days out. Lieutenant Kang reported, his voice carefully neutral. Intelligence estimates. Civilian casualties will exceed 90% if the siege continues that long due to water shortages and insurgent bombardment. What about our current strength? Park asked. We have 300 combat-effective soldiers against an estimated 1,200 Rexian fighters. So we are outnumbered 4-1 with inferior defensive positions if we attempt to break through. Karin waited for a logical conclusion, that the mission was tactically inadvisable and that resources would be better spent preparing defensive positions until reinforcements arrived. The math was simple and brutal, and any rational analysis would prioritize the survival of trained soldiers over civilians who were likely already doomed. We go in tomorrow at dawn. Park said. Karin's antennae went rigid with shock. Captain, the probability of success is extraordinarily low, and the probability of significant casualties is nearly certain. Park turned to look at Karin, and there was no anger in his expression, only a kind of patient sadness. 12,000 people, he said quietly. Mothers and fathers and children. Beings with lives and hopes and families who love them. And you want me to abandon them because the numbers do not add up. I am simply stating the tactical reality. The tactical reality is that those people will die if we do nothing. Kang interjected. The tactical reality is that we can reach them if we move fast enough and hit hard enough. And the tactical reality is that none of us joined this unit to watch innocent people die while we wait for someone else to save them. The assault began at dawn the next day, and Karin insisted on accompanying the lead element despite Park's attempts to assign them to a safer position in the rear. They could not explain why they felt compelled to be there, could not articulate the growing need to understand these humans from the inside, rather than observing from a safe distance. The fighting was unlike anything Karin had ever witnessed. The humans moved through the Rexian positions with a ferocity that bordered on terrifying, adapting their tactics moment by moment as circumstances changed. A blocked street became an opportunity for a flanking maneuver. A destroyed vehicle became cover for an advancing squad. And every setback was met, not with despair, but with immediate creative problem-solving. Karin saw a sergeant, take a position that command had declared impossible to hold, and watched him hold it for 40 minutes, with only 5 soldiers against repeated Rexian counterattacks. They saw medics running into active firefights to drag wounded soldiers to safety, saw engineers clearing paths through debris while energy bolts scorched the air around them, saw ordinary humans performing acts of courage that would have been considered legendary among the Dasari. The explosion came without warning. One moment, Karin was moving with the command element through a narrow alley, and the next moment the world was noise and fire and falling stone. They regained consciousness in darkness, their body pinned beneath rubble that pressed against their carapace with crushing weight. Panic surged through them, an emotion so unfamiliar that it took several seconds to identify. They were trapped and possibly injured and completely helpless in the middle of a combat zone. Hey, observer, can you hear me? The voice was weak but determined, and Karin turned their head to see Corporal Beak lying a few meters away. Her legs were buried under debris, and blood was seeping from a wound on her forehead. But her eyes were alert and focused. Corporal, Corin managed. What happened? Building came down on us, another voice said. And Corin recognized Sergeant. Oh, he was in even worse condition than Beak. His left arm hanging at an angle that suggested significant damage. But he was already trying to move the rubble with his remaining functional limb. Tajian. Stop, Beak commanded. You are going to make your injuries worse. The observer is trapped. Oh, replied as if that explained everything. We need to get them out. I am not the priority, Corin said, confused by the sergeant's actions. You are both more severely injured than I am, and your survival has greater tactical value to the mission. Oh laughed, a sound that seemed inappropriate given their circumstances, but somehow made Corin feel slightly less afraid. That is not how this works, he said. We do not leave people behind based on tactical value, and we do not calculate who deserves to be rescued. But I have done nothing to earn your sacrifice. Corin protested. I am merely an observer, a recorder of events, and my contribution to this mission has been essentially negligible. Beak somehow managed to pull herself closer to Corin, despite her injuries. Her movement slow but determined. You are with us, she said simply. That makes you one of us. And that means we get you out first, because you are the most vulnerable. They worked together. The two wounded humans in the trapped Asari, slowly shifting rubble and creating space. O used his one good arm while Beak directed their efforts. And Corin found themselves following instructions and contributing what little strength they could. It took nearly an hour before Corin could finally pull themselves free. The relief was overwhelming, but it was immediately replaced by something else as they turned to look at the two humans who had spent their limited energy saving someone they barely knew. Thank you, Corin said, and the words felt inadequate. Thank us later, Beak said with a grimace that might have been a smile. Right now we need to signal our position and hope someone comes to dig us out. The rescue team arrived 2 hours later. Following the emergency beacon that O had managed to activate, Corin watched exhausted. Humans tear through the rubble with their bare hands. Heard them shout with relief when they found their comrades still alive. Saw them embrace O and Beak with a desperation that spoke of genuine love. Private Han was among the rescuers. Her side still bandaged from the ambush weeks earlier. She looked at Corin with an expression that held no judgment, only concern. Are you okay? She asked. And there was nothing professional or detached about the question. Corin did not know how to answer. They were physically intact. Their carapace scratched but unbroken. Their eyes functional and their limbs responsive, but something had shifted inside them. Something fundamental that they could not name. I believe so, they said finally. The siege was broken by nightfall. The humans had punched through the Rexian lines and established a corridor. So civilian evacuation, holding their positions through the night while thousands of refugees streamed towards safety. Corin watched the faces of the civilians as they passed, Rethrans clutching their children, merchants dragging whatever possessions they could carry, elderly beings supported by human soldiers who had been fighting for hours without rest. Observer, Park said, appearing beside them as the last transports lifted off. You should have stayed in the rear. I needed to see, Corin replied, though they were no longer certain what they had expected to find. And what did you see? Corin thought about Beak, and all working to free them despite their own injuries. They thought about Han running through weapons fire to save a child and about soldiers weeping with relief at finding their comrades alive. They thought about the look in Park's eyes when he spoke about things that mattered more than survival. I am not certain yet, Corin admitted, but I believe I have stopped thinking of you as subjects. Park nodded as if this made perfect sense. That is usually how it starts, he said quietly. Welcome to the family, observer. Sent to observe humans in combat, I was never the same again. Part 2. The first week at Forward Operating Base Sentinel confused Corin more than any academic study ever. They had expected military efficiency and cold professionalism from a species engaged in prolonged combat operations. But instead, they found something that resembled a large, dysfunctional family gathering. The humans ate together in a crowded mess hall, sharing food from their personal rations and arguing loudly about topics that seemed to have no relevance to their mission. Corin observed two soldiers nearly come to blows over which region of Earth produced superior coffee, only to see them laughing together an hour later as if nothing had happened. "Why do you do this?" Corin asked Private Jisoo Han one evening as she cleaned her weapon at a table surrounded by her squadmates. "Do what?" she asked without looking up from her work. "Form these bonds." Corin clarified, "You could lose any of these people tomorrow. Yet you share meals with them and learn about their families and create emotional connections that will only cause pain when the inevitable occurs." Han paused her cleaning and looked at Corin with an expression that the Sari could not interpret. "That is exactly why we do it," she said finally. "Because tomorrow is not promised to any of us, so today matters more. And the people sitting next to me in that transport matter more than the fear of losing them." Corin recorded her words but could not claim to understand them. The Sari way was to minimize emotional attachments precisely because loss was inevitable, to deliberately cultivate connections that would cause suffering seemed not just illogical but actively self-destructive. The humans persisted in their strange rituals. They displayed images of loved ones in their quarters, small flat photographs that they touched before missions as if the gesture held some protective power. They told stories of home, of parents and siblings and children waiting for their return, speaking these names aloud as if the utterance itself was meaningful. They celebrated birthdays and anniversaries, even in the middle of a war zone, producing small treats from their supplies and singing songs that Corin found melodically simplistic but emotionally charged. On the 8th day, Corin accompanied a routine patrol into the surrounding territory. Captain Park had assured them that the area had been secured and that the mission was simply to maintain presence and gather intelligence. The squad moved through the rocky terrain with practiced ease, their weapons ready, but their postures relatively relaxed. Corin walked near the middle of the formation, recording everything with the small device implanted behind their primary eyes. The ambush came without warning. One moment the patrol was crossing a dry riverbed, and the next moment the air was filled with energy weapon fire from the ridgeline above. Corin froze. There the Sari instincts screaming at them to find cover and remain motionless until the threat passed. The humans did not freeze. They exploded into motion with a coordination that seemed almost supernatural, diving behind rocks and returning fire before Corin could process what was happening. Sergeant Tajan grabbed Corin by the thorax and physically dragged them behind a boulder, his movements rough but somehow careful at the same time. "Stay down," he commanded, his voice hard but not unkind. "We will handle this." Corin watched in horrified fascination as the humans fought. There was no panic in their movements, no hesitation, despite the chaos erupting around them. They communicated in short, sharp bursts, calling positions and coordinating fire without any apparent central direction. Lieutenant Minho Kang called for a flanking maneuver, and 3 soldiers immediately broke from cover and began moving along the riverbed as if they had rehearsed the action 1,000 times. The Rexian insurgents were larger than the humans and better equipped, their chitinous bodies naturally armored, and their weapons more powerful by any objective measure. They should have overwhelmed the patrol within minutes. Instead, the humans began pushing them back. A scream cut through the noise of battle, and Corin saw Private Han fall as an energy bolt caught her in the side. She had been moving toward a small figure Corin had not noticed before, a Retheran child. no more than a juvenile, who had apparently been caught in the crossfire and was huddled behind an insufficient rock. Han was down, but still moving. Still trying to reach the child, even as blood soaked through her uniform. Corporal Soin Beak did not hesitate. She broke from cover and sprinted across open ground toward both of them. Ignoring the weapon's fire that scorched the air around her, she reached Han first, checked her wound with quick professional movements, and then continued to the child. Beak picked up the Retheran juvenile and ran back toward the patrol's position, while two other soldiers provided covering fire that forced the Vrexians to duck behind their own cover. The whole sequence took perhaps 30 seconds. Han was dragged to safety by while Beak shielded the child with her own body, until they reached the boulder where Corin was hiding. Medic, someone shouted, and the soldier Corin did not recognize appeared with a medical kit and began working on Han's wound. The battle continued for another 15 minutes before the Vrexians withdrew, leaving 4 of their number dead on the Rigelineth. Humans had 2 wounded, Han with her side injury and another soldier with a minor burn to his arm. The child was unharmed back at base. Karen found Captain Park in the command center, reviewing reports from the engagement. "May I ask you a question?" Corin said. Park looked up and nodded, his expression tired but open. "Private Han." Corin began carefully. She risked her life to protect the Retheran child, a member of a species not her own, a juvenile she had never met and would likely never see again. "And I do not understand why." Park was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke his voice was soft. "Because she was a child," he said simply. "I do not follow." "That is the reason," Park continued. "She was a child, alone and afraid and in danger. And it did not matter that she was not human, because children should be protected. And Han saw a child who needed protecting. But the risk," Karen pressed, "the tactical disadvantage of exposing herself to enemy fire. Some things matter more than tactics," Park said. And there was something in his eyes that Corin had never seen in any Thesari. Some things matter more than survival. And if we forget that, if we start calculating whether a child's life is worth the risk, then we have already lost something more important than any battle. Corin returned to their quarters that night and attempted to begin their first official report to the observation course. They wrote several paragraphs, describing the ambush in clinical detail, documenting the human response time and the coordination of their counterattack, and the eventual tactical victory. But when they read the words back, they felt hollow and incomplete. The report said nothing about Han's determination as she crawled toward a child who was not her own. It said nothing about Beak's courage as she ran through weapons fire to save them both. It said nothing about the look in Park's eyes when he explained why some things mattered more than survival. For the first time in their career, Karen understood that pure data could be a kind of lie. They deleted the report and stared at the blank screen for a long time, wondering if they would ever find words adequate to describe what they had witnessed. The orders arrived on a morning like any other, delivered through the secure channels of the Galactic Observation Course with all the ceremony of a routine supply. Manifest Corencio read them twice, their 4 compound eyes scanning the text while their antennae twitched with what might have been excitement or perhaps anxiety. The Thesari were not known for strong emotions, and Corin had spent 20 cycles training themselves to be the perfect example of their species: calm, analytical, and utterly detached from the subjects they studied. "You have been assigned to observe human combat operations on Rithara 4. The orders stated in the flat, bureaucratic language of the course. Duration: indefinite until sufficient data has been collected regarding human military methodology and psychological patterns during extended conflict." Corin closed the document and sat in silence for several moments. Humans were a relatively new species on the galactic stage. having achieved faster than light travel only a few generations ago. They were considered unremarkable in most respects. Average strength, average speed, limited natural weapons, short lifespans, and a puzzling tendency toward emotional decision-making that baffled more logical species. Yet their combat effectiveness ratings were among the highest in the known galaxy, and no one could adequately explain why. Commander Yelthin summoned Korin to the briefing chamber later that day. The old Asari had lost 2 of his eyes in a research accident decades ago and now wore optical implants that glowed faintly blue in the dim light of the station. "You understand the importance of this assignment," he said. And it was not a question. The Galactic Council has been watching the situation on Rathara 4 with growing concern. And the human forces there have been fighting for 3 standard cycles against the Vrexian insurgency. "I have reviewed the preliminary files," Korin replied, keeping their voice neutral and professional. The humans appear to be performing adequately, despite being far from their home systems. Yelthin made a sound that might have been a laugh. Though with the Asari, it was always difficult to tell adequately, he repeated. "They have lost 400 soldiers in 3 cycles of constant fighting. Yet their unit cohesion remains at 97%. And their combat effectiveness has actually increased over time." He leaned forward, his implants brightening. "Every model we have suggests they should have broken by now, requested reinforcements, or withdrawn to more defensible positions. But instead, they keep pushing forward and keep protecting civilians who are not even of their own species." Curious behavior, Korin agreed, though privately they wondered if the humans were simply too stubborn or too foolish to recognize a losing situation. "You will embed with their 47th Combined Arms Battalion," Yelthin continued. "Their commanding officer has agreed to grant you full access to operations in exchange for a promise to share our final report with human authorities." "Understood, Commander. One more thing," Yelthin said as Korin turned to leave. "Do not underestimate these creatures because they lack claws or venom or natural armor. For every observer we have sent to study humans has returned changed in ways they struggle to describe. And several have resigned from the corps entirely." Korin dismissed the warning as unnecessary dramatics. They were the Asari, after all, and their species had been conducting objective observations of other races for thousands of cycles without incident. A few small soft mammals with loud voices and strange habits would hardly prove challenging to document. The journey to Rathara 4 took 11 standard days, and Korin spent the time reviewing everything the corps had collected on human behavior. They learned about human pack bonding tendencies, their unusual sleep cycles, their need for social interaction, and their bewildering custom of forming emotional attachments to inanimate objects and animals. They read about human endurance and their ability to continue functioning through injuries that would incapacitate most species. They studied human communication patterns and noted the heavy reliance on facial expressions and body language that supplemented their verbal exchanges. None of it prepared Korin for the reality, the transport that carried them from the orbital station to the surface was filled with human soldiers returning from leave, and the noise was almost overwhelming. They talked constantly, laughed loudly, and made physical contact with each other in ways that made Korin deeply uncomfortable. One soldier clapped another on the back hard enough to produce an audible sound, and both of them grinned as if this minor assault was somehow pleasant. "You must be the observer," a voice said, and Korin turned to find a human male standing nearby. He was compact and muscular with black hair cut short, and eyes that seemed to hold both warmth and something harder beneath the surface. "I am Captain Do-Yoon Park, commanding officer of the 47th, and I will be your primary liaison during your stay with us." Observer Korin Co, Corin replied, offering the formal Dasari gesture of acknowledgement. I appreciate your willingness to accommodate my presence. Park smiled. An expression Corin had learned was generally positive among humans, though it could also indicate nervousness or even aggression depending on context. We are happy to have you, he said. My soldiers are curious about you as well, since we do not get many Dasari visitors out here. I will endeavor to remain unobtrusive. No need for that. Park said, if you want to understand how we fight, you need to understand how we live. So you will eat with us and sleep in our quarters and join us on patrol when it is safe enough to do so. Corin was uncertain how to respond to such an informal arrangement, but they nodded agreement. The transport began its descent through the atmosphere, and the humans gradually grew quieter. Their jokes and laughter faded into focused silence, and Corin watched the transformation with fascination. The soldier who had been loudly complaining about the food on the station was now checking his weapon with methodical precision. The young woman, who had been showing pictures of her family to anyone who would look, was now staring out the viewport with an expression Corin could not read. We will be landing at Ford Operating Base Sentinel in approximately 15 minutes, Park announced to the cabin. Full combat readiness upon touchdown, since we have reports of insurgent activity in the area. The humans moved as one, securing gear and running final checks on their equipment. Corin noticed how they helped each other without being asked, tightening straps and passing ammunition with the ease of long practice. Is this normal? Corin asked Park quietly. The sudden change in demeanor. Park glanced at his soldiers, and something like pride flickered across his features. They know what is waiting down there, he said. They joke and laugh because it keeps them human, but when the time comes to work, they are ready. I see, Corin said. Though they were not certain they did, the transport touched down with a shudder, and the rear ramp began to lower. Rithara 4's atmosphere rushed in, hot and dry and carrying the distant smell of smoke. The humans rose from their seats in unison, their eyes hard and their movements precise. Corin watched them file out into the harsh light of an alien sun, and for the first time since receiving their orders, they felt a flicker of something that might have been unease. These were not the chaotic, emotional creatures the files had described. These were predators wearing the faces of friendly mammals. And Corin suddenly understood why Commander Yelthin had warned them, as Corin followed the soldiers onto the dusty ground of Rithara 4. They caught Captain Park, watching them with an expression that seemed almost knowing. Welcome to the war, observer, he said quietly. Try to keep up.